And point number 21 says, all tribes of the land wailed at the coming of the Lord. All tribes of the land wailed at the coming of the Lord. Our texts are Revelation 1:7, Acts 3:12 to 23, Zechariah 12:10 to 14, Matthew 24:30, John 19:34 and 37, Luke 23:27 to 30, Revelation 6:15 to 17. So let's go to our Bible, and we're going to have our main text, which is Revelation 1:7. Revelation 1:7 is our main text. And it says there, we're reading from the English Standard Version, behold, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him, and all the tribes of the earth will wail on account of him. Remember, when you are reading any verse from the book of Revelation, any chapter from the book of Revelation, always read it in the context given in Revelation 1 verses 1 to 3, which is all the events were about to happen in the time of John. Therefore, behold, he, Christ, is coming with the clouds in John's time, and every eye in John's time will see him, even those who had in John's time pierced him, and all the tribes of the earth in John's time will wail on account of him. Even so, amen. Now, as I mentioned in the previous point, the every eye which will see him is narrowed by the fact that it was those who pierced him. All right? So the every eye of those who pierced him, which was the Jewish people, the Israelites. So this cloud coming was to the Jews, was to Israel, because Christ was sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So his first coming was to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and his second coming was to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, in judgment this time. So the coming was directed to those who pierced him, and so all the tribes of the land would be of those who pierced him. All right? And all of this would happen in John's time. So therefore we have our historical context, and you cannot shift this prophecy and make it something of our future. It is too specific to do that. Okay? It is too specific to be moved out of its historical context and made to apply at every which way we feel like applying it. Now, the tribes of the land who pierced Christ and who would wail were the people of Israel. They were instrumental in the crucifixion of Christ, and they were so charged by God as being the ones who killed the author of life. Acts chapter 3 verse 12 to 13 tells us that, okay? So you go to the book of Acts chapter 3. Peter, being filled with the Holy Spirit, it says there, and when Peter saw it, he addressed the people, men of Israel. Notice who he's speaking to. Men of Israel. Why do you wonder at this, and why do you stare at us as though by our own power or piety we have made the paralyzed man to walk? Verse 13, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, the God of our fathers glorified his servant Jesus, whom you, men of Israel, delivered over and denied in the presence of Pilate when he had decided to release him. But you denied the holy and righteous one and asked for a murderer to be granted to you. Remember, they asked for the release of Barabbas instead of Christ. Verse 15, and you killed the author of life. Who? Men of Israel killed the author of life, according to Peter. And Peter was speaking from the unction of the Holy Spirit. Right? So as it was customary with the vision of the revelation, where many of the scenes of the vision were spiritual bookmarks pointing to the writings of the Old Testament prophets, the scene of those who pierced him was really taken from Zechariah, the Old Testament prophet Zechariah, who wrote about those who pierced him in Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10 to 14. All right? So those who pierced him, we understood Peter to be addressing the men of Israel. But also, God had already foretold who would be the people who would pierce his son. So let's go, as we said, to Zechariah chapter 12 and read verses 10 to 14. It says there, "And I will pour out on the house of David," notice, I love how we have been taught to overlook detail after detail after detail just to pull something clear out of context. But look how much detail the Lord gives us here. I will pour out on what? The house of David. The house of David is what? The tribe of Judah. And the inhabitants of where? Jerusalem. Okay, so we're talking about Judah. We are talking about Jerusalem. That we are in the context of Israel. A spirit of grace and pleas for mercy, so that when they look on me, on whom they have pierced, they shall mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and weep bitterly over him as one weeps over a firstborn. So, according to Zechariah, the people who would pierce the Lord's son were the house of David, which was the tribe of Judah, which are the Judeans, or the Jews as they were called in the time of Christ. They are the inhabitants of Jerusalem. These were the people who had pierced him. And these were the people now who would mourn, they would wail, they would weep bitterly. Because of why? Because of the calamity, the judgment, the great tribulation that would come upon them at that time when they had pierced, shortly after they had pierced the Son of God. Look at what Jesus said in Matthew 24, verse 30. He says, then, talking about shortly after or during the tribulation, he says, then will appear in the heaven the sign of the Son of Man. Notice what would appear. Not a man riding on a cloud, but a sign. Okay? A sign would appear. Okay? And then all the tribes of the land, this word earth here, is land. We are speaking of the Holy Land. Remember these tribes? We just read who they were in Zechariah. The tribe of Judah, the Jews, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. They will what? Mourn. See, you cannot take the context and the details and totally disregard them and say, oh, this is going to be sometime in the future, and the people in the United States and the people in Russia and the people in North Korea and the people in South America. No. It already told us. Zechariah already told us this prophecy, the fulfillment of it would be in Jerusalem and would be concerning the Jews. They would be the people who pierced him, and they were the people who would be mourning. Right? They will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds. What did we learn coming in the clouds meant? in points number 19 and 20. Coming in judgment, coming to execute judgment for the rebelliousness of Israel, coming in the clouds of heaven with great power and great glory. Right? Zechariah says, in that day shall there be a great mourning in Jerusalem, in the family of David, of the house of David. These were the Jews. This was an event clearly associated with Jerusalem. Even in Revelation 7, Revelation chapter 1 verse 7, our main text, tells you that the coming of Christ with the clouds was to the people who pierced him. They would be the ones who would see him. Every eye of those who pierced him would see him. And also it tells you it was the tribes of the earth, the tribes of the land in John's time who would see him. All right? Another piece of information we can go to is John 19. Right? John 19. And I'm telling you, I understand many of us would struggle, or some of us would struggle with these things, because the modern narrative is very appealing. You know, it has all the drama and the suspense and the excitement. It has been well crafted and put together. I know, because I used to be an evangelist and I loved to preach about the coming of Christ. I loved to preach about the day of resurrection, where we will burst out of our graves and we will be caught up to meet the Lord in the air. I loved to preach that, man. That was my favorite thing. End time events and end time prophecy, that was my favorite subject. And because it was my favorite subject, I studied it and I studied it and I studied it until I stumbled upon the truth. And I was faced with a choice. I now had to just receive the words of Christ and keep them, and my denominational narrative had to be let go. And that's the choice many of us have to make. We have to keep the words of Christ and let go our denominational narrative. As appealing as it is, as exciting as it is, as much as we know it by heart, as much as maybe 90% of the hymns we sing are speaking about Christ to come, you know, and we must be ready and we must watch and we must wait and this kind of thing. But we must be willing to give up all of that for the words of Christ, to keep them. So at the cross, at the crucifixion, John's narrative of the crucifixion, Christ was on the cross. And it says, but one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once there came out blood and water. So it was a Roman soldier that pierced him, you know. But remember, according to Peter, the Romans were not held responsible for the death of Christ. It was the Jews who were held responsible, for they were the one who delivered him into the hands of the Romans, right? So as far as God is concerned, it was the guilt and the responsibility of the death of his son was on Israel. So he who saw it has borne witness. That is John speaking of himself. John, he says, I saw it and I bore witness, and my testimony is true. And I know that I am telling the truth. This is the way that the Hebrews normally put themselves in the third person. Okay? That you may also believe. Okay? So let's read on verse 37. So after they pierced, the soldier pierced Christ in his side, and the blood and the water flowed out, it says, John made note, and again, another scripture says they will look on him whom they have pierced. So who was the they? They were, at least the Roman soldiers, the crowd of Jews, the high priests, the Sanhedrin, Caiaphas, and all the dignitaries from Herod, the Pharisees, the scribes, the lawyers, right? As well as the disciples and their families, right? These were Israel, corporate Israel, who was looking on him whom they have pierced, right? All who were at the crucifixion looking on him were alive in John's time, because John was there witnessing it. And when Christ would come in the glory of his Father, with, on, and in the cloud, what that meant, that parable saying meant, coming in judgment, returning in judgment, he would return also in the time of those very people who had witnessed his crucifixion. Right? They would see his executive judgment on their city, on their temple, and on their people. It would happen in their time. And at that time, the families of the land of Israel, the land of Judea, would mourn for the calamity that befell their nation and their people. Look at Luke chapter 23. Okay? Luke chapter 23, verse 37. Look at what Christ said on the day of his crucifixion. He says, and there followed him a great multitude of the people and of the women who were mourning and lamenting for him. So all of Israel was following behind. Okay? To witness him whom they pierced. But turning to them. Okay? So there were these women who were mourning and lamenting for him. And Jesus turned to them and said, daughters of Jerusalem, don't weep for me. But weep for yourselves and for your children. Why? Verse 29. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bore and the breasts that never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. Okay? So Jesus said, listen, don't mourn for me, because what is coming upon you is 1,000,000 times worse than what you have done to me. You will be alive, you daughters of Jerusalem, who have witnessed me being pierced. You will be alive to see the recompense when I will return in judgment. And it will be so terrible that people will say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. Now, let us just go over to Revelation 6. Okay? Revelation chapter 6. Verse 15. Okay? So remember, Jesus told these women that they would witness the time come upon Jerusalem and its inhabitants when it will be so terrible that people will be calling upon the mountains to cover them and the hills to fall upon them so that they can escape from this horrible tribulation, right? Notice it would happen, Jesus said, clearly said there in Luke 23, it would happen in their time. That's what he was talking about. Now let's read Revelation chapter 6, verse 15. Then the kings of the earth and the great ones and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. So you notice, Revelation chapter 6, Jesus had already said that would happen in the time of the very people who had witnessed him being pierced. So now we can read this text as, then in the time of John, the kings of the earth and the great ones and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone, slave and free, of the Jewish people who had pierced Christ, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. Now, historically, this happened because many of the Jews, many of those who were of high wealth, who were wealthy, they went and hid from the Romans. They went into the caves to hide from the Romans because they were wealthy and they had their wealth on them, and they knew if they were captured, they would be killed, and also their wealth would be taken. So they went and they hid their wealth, and they went in the caves as well and hid. Right? And they were so afraid that they wanted the caves and the mountains that they were hiding to fall, to cover them from the wrath that was being meted out in Jerusalem. Right? So this actually happened in the year 70. This actually happened in the year 70. And Jesus said it would happen in the time of the daughters of Jerusalem who were weeping for him. And Revelation said all the things written therein would happen in the time of John, which was in the time of the daughters of Jerusalem. Right? So no matter how which angle you come at this thing from, you cannot escape the conclusive evidence. You cannot escape the evidence that these things happened in the time of John. You can't escape it. Right? Jesus prophesied that the destruction of Jerusalem would happen in the time of the daughters of Jerusalem. Revelation said in verse 6, in chapter 6, that this time when they were calling for the rocks and mountains to fall on them would happen in the time of the sixth seal. See it there? When he opened the sixth seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake. That was when the city of Jerusalem came under attack. That was when the buildings began to be thrown down. All right? Jesus was talking about something that would happen in the time of John. Revelation was talking about something that happened or would have happened in the time of John. And so, once more, the Revelation assures us that the terrible tribulation that Jesus, Daniel, and the prophets, that tribulation that they foretold, it is not in our future. It is something that happened in the time of John, 2,000 years ago in our past. That generation who pierced Christ, they have passed away long ago. They have passed off the scene. And Jesus says all things written would have been fulfilled in that generation. The things that were fulfilled have opened the way for us today to have a oneness relationship with our Father. It has opened the way for us to be sons of the living God by having faith in Jesus. It has opened the way for us to have the kingdom in us, the Father in us, the Son in us, the law in us, the Spirit in us, the treasure of heaven in us. All right? That was the generation which Christ referred to to which he would come in judgment. And that judgment coming was manifested in the horrific slaughter of the Jews, the burning down of their city, the leveling of that once magnificent temple. Now we live in an age of life and grace. We live in the age of Christ. We are living in the age of the new cosmos, the paradigm of the tree of life.